Does anyone else hate endings? Because I am definitely the kind of person who dreads the ending from the beginning of the story. It doesn't matter whether this is a book or a movie or a TV show. You can bet I'm going to be genuinely depressed about it anywhere from 3 hours to 3 weeks afterwards. And this dread of endings doesn't really have a beginning for me. See, typical 6-year-old girls dream about princesses or ninjas. I had vivid nightmares about dead bodies floating around my bed or someone murdering my parents. At 12, when typical girls are worrying about cute boys or nasty rumors, I worried relentlessly that my parents or my friends were going to die without me getting the chance to say goodbye. On July 2nd, 2013, a very close friend of mine, who I happened to be talking to half the night before, was shot and killed early that morning. To say the least, I started losing control. I had strings of panic attacks, and the fear became constant and debilitating. It affected every area of my daily life, from eating to sleep, school, to my social relationships. I went to a couple of counselors, and they pretty much told me to accept it and move on. And me, being who I am, was like, duh. Because, see, I knew what I had to do. I knew that acceptance was the ultimate goal. But not a single person I talked to could tell me how to do that. And that's really what I needed to know. So at a complete point of helplessness, I went to the absolute last place anyone should go for medical advice, whether that be physical or mental. I went to the internet and found out actually useful advice. And a lot of websites told me to plan my own funeral, which is something I'll talk about later, but was actually pretty helpful. And it really got me to be able to stand up here in front of you today. As you could tell, I'm pretty nervous about it because it's very personal for me. And I thought, well, if this worked, maybe if I dig into learning more about death anxiety, that it'll help me conquer my fear. So when I started doing that, I learned that death anxiety peaks in adolescence and emerging adulthood. And I asked myself the question a lot of you are probably asking yourselves when I say that. Why? Well, I developed a study looking at death anxiety in ages 14 to 25, and looking at how social media use and extracurricular involvement can affect death attitudes. A researcher named Hainish said that the ending of life and death is really the new black in contemporary society, meaning that social media outlets expose teens to images of death, dying, and violence at an ever-increasing rate, and this can facilitate death anxiety. This facilitation is supported by a study done by King and Hayslip that found that even just general references to death can bring fears of death into the forefronts of college students' minds. So I hypothesize that as social media use increases, death anxiety will also increase. But another popular outlet for young adults is extracurricular activities. And this can be athletics, organizations, or even a Dungeons and Dragons group that meets together twice a week. And Martinez and colleagues did a study that shows that extracurriculars promotes a positive school experience. And because of the opportunity for social support, I'm hypothesizing that as extracurriculars increase, death anxiety will ultimately decrease. Now, I don't want to give away all of my study. It's a 13-minute questionnaire, or 30-minute questionnaire. And because it's still in distribution, I don't want to give away too much, but I want you all to try something. So I have a couple examples, and I want you to think about how you would rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. So I'm going to ask you if these things make you anxious or disturbed, from not at all to very much. So when you think about the pain involved in dying, from a scale of 1 to 5, or losing someone close to you, or even missing out on so much after you die. The point is, death anxiety is a lot more complex than I think people tend to realize. And even though I'm not anywhere near done with this study, because I've just started, I ran a pilot study using 10 participants, 8 females, 2 males, ages 19 to 24. And as you can see by the graph behind me, most maximum means of death anxiety max out at about 120 out of 140. So it's pretty high so far. When we look at the previous graph that I showed, theirs max out at around 100 for both male and female. And even though they, granted, have a lot more participants than I do, I'm really curious to see how this plays out as I go along. But the thing that I found to be really cool, because I'm nerdy, is that, so the questionnaire that I have is split into two parts. It's your own death and dying and others' death and dying. And the black line, which is significantly higher, larger, is anxiety over other people's death and dying, presumably when others think of their loved ones. So I'm really curious to see if this gap grows as I go along as well. Death anxiety peaks at a time where life is changing drastically. And in a culture where death is neither a common topic or comfortable topic of discussion, it could be overlooked or even dismissed. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can start the conversation, because that's really what I want you all to get out of this speech. Now, I'm not a professional, keep in mind, but really, these are just a couple examples, but there's really two ways you can kind of go about doing this. You can either be really blunt, like I probably would, and be like, hey dude, do you have death anxiety? Because we could talk about it if you want. Or you can be a little bit more nonchalant and say something along the lines of, hey, you know, this really bothers me about death, and kind of just hope that they pick up what you're putting down. But there's two really big don'ts that you should really not do when you're talking about death anxiety to somebody, and that's don't be the guy that says just accept it and move on, because that's like telling a very angry woman to calm down. It's just not going to work. The second one is don't push your religious beliefs on somebody. For instance, telling me that I'm going to go to heaven when I die just isn't going to help, because I frankly just don't believe that, and people believe different things. But just don't be afraid to bring it up, because not only can I, the person that's anxious, get something out of it by knowing how you think about it or how you deal with it, you can also learn more about yourself, and it kind of helps people feel not so alone. For those of you out there who have death anxiety and are like, hey, how did you deal with this? I'll help you out. Mindfulness is one of those things where you get in a very relaxed state, and you slowly can think about death while being really relaxed and kind of stop when you start to get afraid. If you do this enough, the point is to kind of think about it in a natural setting and not lose control. Writing a will is something that I'll frankly do after I get married next year, but is a good way as well. And then talking or writing about it helps a lot of people. The biggest thing for me, like I said, was planning my own funeral, which is good for me because it helped, but bad for the person who has to plan my funeral. So it's very extensive. For instance, I want people to cry, so I want a violin, is my favorite instrument, and I want songs like Good Riddance by Green Day to be played, just purposely to make people cry. But I also want like my favorite foods, because it's about me, so gotta eat my stuff. It's like mashed potatoes, watermelon, my favorite foods. But one of the other things that I'm pretty confident about is I want, because I'm not religious, like I said, I want specific friends and family to go up there and share memories about me and the life that we lived together. Because no matter how long my life is, I want people to know that it was fun and happy and filled with love. And the biggest thing that I get super psyched about, to an unnatural degree, is this thing called a tree pod. So I don't want to be burned, because that's just me. But your body goes in this little sack, and you can pick your own tree. And that's not only environmentally friendly, you can, it's like a way to kind of give back and to live on. So I think that's really cool. So I'm really excited about it. The biggest thing, though, is death anxiety and death in general have a lot of bad connotations, but there's a lot of good things about it, too. For instance, it makes me a little bit more cautious about risky situations. I learned to kind of look at the beautiful things in life and really appreciate all the little things. But one of the biggest things it does for me is all those weird people on the screen, everyone except for me in the photos, those weird people, it causes me to appreciate them so much more. And my mom can attest to this because she posted on Facebook last week. I called her in the middle of the day, randomly, just to tell her that I loved her. And even though some of my friends might tell me that I say I love you a little bit too much, can get overbearing, I'd much rather be the person remembered for saying I love you too much than the one remembered for not saying it enough. Thank you.